Hi, everyone. We are back with another Masterclass. Who is with us today? It is Dr. Josephine Carlisle and Lisa Sanders from Alliance Counselling. Alliance Counselling have been part of Pregnant and Popped since I think the very beginning. I remember having a conversation with Dr. Sylvia about what I was hoping to achieve with the Baby Fair for Mums and the wider Pregnant and Popped community. And she was in Portugal at the time, I think, but literally got on the phone to the team in Singapore almost immediately and has been an incredible support to the community ever since. So what are we talking about today? Well, parenting in this information age can be empowering, but also incredibly overwhelming. Constant exposure to carefully curated images and narratives can contribute to feelings of inadequacy and anxiety amongst parents. This can lead to comparisons, I know I do, and potential disharmony with parents, friends, and families. It's so important to maintain a balanced perspective and prioritize mental well-being. Deinfluencing parenthood requires evaluating and filtering the information and expectations around parenting and making deliberate choices that align with personal values and beliefs rather than external pressures. In this masterclass, we will be discussing prioritizing connected and present parenting over idealized portrayals of parenthood and celebrating diversity with different parenting approaches and styles. And we will attempt to cut through the noise and present information on parenting supported by clinical psychologists. The legal stuff. I do have to advise you that the educational content of our masterclasses is the work of our Pregnant and Popped partners. We are not licensed medical or legal professionals, and this is neither a legal nor medical platform. The content of today should not be considered medical or legal advice. Instead, it is always best to consult with your specialist providers for any specific concerns or questions. And use the information from today as a complementary tool to help guide those discussions and care plans. In short, our goal is to provide a supportive and informative community for expecting and new parents. But it's important to always prioritize your own health and the advice of your specialist providers. Just a quick moment of your time. And today I am going to keep this very, very brief because I do want to get on and hand on over to our specialist today. I just want to remind you all that I am Kathy. I'm the founder of Empower and Pregnant and Popped. And at my core, I'm a certified postpartum doula. So that means I help people in their homes in those first few days, weeks, and months after having a baby. But I really don't want to dwell on that today because I really do want to give an introduction to Dr. Josephine and Lisa Sanders. Now, I looked on the Alliance Counselling website and my first introductions were very comprehensive because it is absolutely mind-blowing what these ladies have achieved, what they've experienced, and what they help mums, dads, children, teens, anyone with. What I am going to do now is just very briefly tell you where they have come from, and then I will leave you to go to the Alliance Counselling website to learn more. I'm sure they'll cover some themselves. So Dr. Josephine Carlisle is a UK and Singapore registered clinical psychologist. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University College London, where she practiced as a clinical psychologist in the National Health Service before emigrating to Singapore in 2015. Since she's been here, she has been working with the Singapore Ministry of Social and Family Development. She also works in private practice. And Lisa is a qualified clinical psychologist from South Africa with a passion for working therapeutically across various ages, genders, and cultures. She holds a master's in clinical psychology. She has published academically and contributes to the field of psychosocial behavior and mother and child development. Like I say, I really, really could go on because what these women support families with, the list is endless. They are absolutely incredible, but I am going to hand over because I am so excited to have these specialists with us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kathy, for such a warm welcome. both Joey and myself are, really pleased to be a part of this initiative and to talk through the topic today, de-influencing parenthood, something I think, we can really relate to in our own journeys, and something we've been wanting to talk about for a while is how we can cut through the noise and be content, connected parents. So we won't talk too much more about ourselves. I think, Kathy, you did such a wonderful job, but here are the details. If you do want to take a look on the website and find out a little bit more of us, the link is there, as well as the link to our Instagram, which I know is ironic given the topic of today's talk. We also at Alliance have a really wonderful pre- and postnatal team that offer really specialized services, given that this is a very niche area to work in. And I think what's so lovely about the team is, a range of skills and expertise, and they're also available at various times. And, I think that makes it a very flexible, accessible support system to tap into. One can always, access it with babies in hand or on video, that's something that is part and parcel of this kind of work. So once more, lots of information on the website. We won't deep dive into it today, but check it out if you are interested. And then this slide is just showing 2 QR codes, one of which might be interesting for future signups. The Mindful Mums newsletter that comes out on a monthly basis has some great reviewed information and also resources to check out. And then on the left, we have a wellbeing checkup, which is on the Alliance website. You can access it via that QR code, and everything is kept confidential, but it gives you a bit of an indication on, how one is coping, especially in, the postpartum period. And it also has suggestions as to, how you may access support or help if that's something you feel may be needed. So we will show these QR codes again at the end of the presentation. So not to worry if you didn't quite get a chance to access them now. So we're going to be covering some of the pros and cons of parenthood in this information age, and particularly talk to the super mum myth that I think we all get a bit hooked by, and various ways of coping with cutting through some of this noise. And then we're going to talk through good enough parenting, what that actually means and what that might look like, and ending off with some recommended resources. So really, parenting in this day and age means we are often exposed to a huge amount of information and influence, be it via social medias, WhatsApp groups, family, friends, or the broader society and cultural context in which we find ourselves. And we know that whilst this can be incredibly empowering, this constant exposure to these curated images and, narratives can also feel quite overwhelming and can, in some cases, contribute to those feelings of inadequacy and anxiety amongst parents. It can also lead to a lot of comparisons and disharmony, right? And, we see everything being kind of spoken about on social medias, from feeding, weaning, sleep, to emotion regulation, discipline, managing screen time. Literally every aspect of pregnancy and parenthood seems to get a lot of noise on social medias and various other platforms. So we really just want to promote how important it is to use it to one's advantage, to maintain a balanced perspective and really prioritize one's own mental well-being, and of course that of one's family. So we wanted to just take a very quick moment for a reflection, and I want you all just to consider for yourselves how social media exposure has potentially impacted you during your pregnancy and or your pregnancy journey so far. I just want you to take a moment now to just reflect upon the exposure and influence this may have had for you. So we wanted to really make sure that we're, not here to trash talk social media or, give it a bad rap, but rather to point out the pros and cons and how we may want to, work with it, as I said, to our benefit. So I think, many pros actually, in that we can find a lot of information very quickly. We can often also derive a sense of community and belonging by those networks that maybe we wouldn't otherwise have been able to access. There can also be a sense of validation for some of our own, beliefs or ideas, and a sense of empowerment to experiment, play around, try new things that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise thought of. I think some of the cons can be the comparenting, which is Joey's coined term, and I do love it. I think it speaks to the rabbit hole we all fall into in parenthood. And I think another important point to just make here is that sometimes the narratives portrayed can be somewhat dogmatic and rigid, not allowing for a huge amount of one's own individual discernment and flexibility as to how that information fits for oneself and one's family. Unfortunately, not everything is evidence-based, and there can be some unreliable and unsupported sources of information out there, and it's sometimes quite difficult to filter that accordingly. An information overload. I'm sure there'll be a lot of heads nodding to that one. I know I can, speak to how overwhelming that can feel sometimes. For every opinion, there's an opposite opinion in parenthood. And then, of course, it can lead to some discrepancies with other caregivers as well. And we know that, that support by other caregivers and the networks around us are particularly important during this major time of transition in our lives. So that takes us to the super mum myth. And Joey and I have often wondered, who is this woman that seamlessly and effortlessly glides through life, looking perfect, with perfectly behaved children, managing full-time job, relationship, household, etc. And I think, through our work together, we've realized, well, we're actually all doing this to some degree, right? But the perception is that others are doing it better somehow. They look calmer, they're more put together. So the reality is that, none of this is effortless. And particularly motherhood, right? Or fatherhood. That actually, if you're finding it hard and you're struggling, that simply makes you human, facing very complex real life challenges, right? And I think this portrayal of the ideal supermom, not only is it a falsehood, but it affects most of us, and it can be particularly harmful in creating a huge amount of self-doubt, of guilt, shame, and feelings of inadequacy as well, right? The next slide shows us quite nicely, and it may feel familiar to some of you, the rabbit holes and spiraling of our thoughts that can often be triggered by any narrative portrayed online. But, this one is in relation to that supermom myth. And you can see the kind of triggering that occurs in terms of the thoughts coming up, the comparisons, lots of shoulds and shouldn'ts, right? And ultimately resulting in a lot of feelings of irritability, low mood, guilt, shame, and self-judgments around oneself as a mother, as well as, the expectation of how this should be experienced. And we really wanted to illuminate this today, so we can also start putting a bit of scaffold as to how one may work with not just the filtering of information, but once we have also been hooked by some of the narratives, to begin to unhook from those. So the next couple of slides show a little bit around the various categories or styles of unhelpful thinking that you may absolutely identify with, and you may have seen illuminated in that previous example. And, our minds have really evolved in many different clever ways to try and warn us of threats, right? But these can also become unhelpful traps, particularly when we're parenting in this modern age. And we'll just invite you to notice if any of these feel familiar to you. And we'll be trying to promote a gentle acknowledgement and awareness of when maybe you have been hooked by one of these thinking styles, and being compassionate that it's totally normal and human to do so. Once we catch ourselves, we may then be able to unhook from some of those thoughts. So a lot here jump out at me, the kind of magnification.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of us can relate to a lot of these. These sort of thinking traps that we fall into, it's not indicative that we are, making mistakes in our thinking or there's something wrong here. These are very, like Lisa said, we've evolved to kind of filter information, especially when we've had or having kids, because the studies show that our brains change and we're paying more attention. There's more brain power going on in the emotional part of our brain. We're likely to feel a little bit more anxious and filter information because our job is to keep this little helpless blob alive. So we might tend to focus more on things that provoke anxiety and maybe ignore helpful information, to do a lot of shoulding and musting. I should be able to handle this. I ought to be able to cope. I'm the mum. I should know best. I should be able to take naturally to breastfeeding, for example, to tend to blow things out of proportion, to magnify things. I don't mind sharing one of mine was if I was up at night and sleep was difficult, that I would get really hooked onto the assumption and the magnification, catastrophic thoughts that what if I never sleep again? I'm never going to get a good night's sleep again. What about my health? I'm going to go mad. I would really just get stuck on that. And that's a bit of a trap, because obviously now I can look back and say, well, that wasn't the case. Whether or not it was the case, that's not a helpful thing for me to be thinking in that moment. So I've personally used a lot of these strategies that we're going to try and cover today.
Once more, just to flag that it's certainly not unusual or concerning if you do relate to a lot of these. Our minds are very similar to your minds. And I think it's about being able to notice when it occurs and, where possible, to try and hook with it with some of, the techniques we'll elicit a little bit later. So, Joey, perhaps I'll leave you to the next couple of slides.
Sure. So I'm conscious that we don't want to get into too much kind of psycho babble. A lot of these words might sound a bit textbooky. but we do want to kind of let people in on some of the things that you can try and that you can like research, and a window into maybe what Lisa and I might do in our therapy sessions as well, so in case that's something that interests you or that you're going to recommend to your network. So the answer to some of this, well, the answer to a lot of struggles in life, whether it's about parenting or not, and something that we work with our clients and we work on ourselves, is something called psychological flexibility. And that might sound like a bit of a blurby word, but what we mean is building our ability to, in the face of all of this stuff, all of these triggers, all of this information, all of these difficult thoughts and ideas and traps that we fall into naturally, can we be free to make choices in line with our values, in line with how we want to parent, how we want our lives to look, rather than automatically making decisions based on this stuff that we're talking about, all this messy stuff. So how, in order to do that, we need to build skills in, well, knowing what our values are. How do I know? Do I want to wean, do baby-led weaning or spoon, or I'm breastfeeding or I'm not, or any number of small, do I sleep train, do I not? All of those things. And that those decisions just kind of multiply. Taking a bit of time to know what our values are is a big part of the work that we do, so that you can, have all this great information and opinions and advice, but be able to be free from feeling obliged, to be free to make choices flexibly. So in order to do that, we're going to need a few tools, right, to be able to slow down in the face of all of this stuff, to be able to notice when we've got caught up in that stuff and to get a bit of space from it. So you probably already heard Lisa use the word like hooked and unhooked. So what we mean is, you can probably relate. Sometimes difficult thoughts, or you're scrolling something, or someone's giving you advice and you get really stuck in your head about it, and those thoughts are true in that moment, and however we act is going to be quite rigid. So what we want to do is be able to give you some hints and tips how you can stay more present. Don't get swept away with all that stuff. How you can unhook yourself from these difficult thinking traps that you might have fallen into. Lisa had a note on there about, we notice that we're shoulding a lot. I should be able to handle this. I should have my baby sleeping. I should have my baby on a nap schedule. All that stuff. We've all been there. Stop shoulding all over yourself. Just to be able to notice that you're doing it, and just be a bit more gentle, be a bit more present, and think, okay, forget the shoulds. What will I do now? And we want that, what I do next, to be something that's in line with your values. And we also, we've put here, we want to celebrate diversity. One thing I learned, and you've probably all seen, as some of you here will be expats, or you'll have diverse community of mum friends. We're in a diverse community as we speak. There are so many different ways to do things. And that, aside from a very small number of safety issues, like, don't leave the baby alone in the bath, there's not really a lot that's black and white about parenting. There's lots of, as we say in England, there's lots of ways to skin a cat. There's so many ways to approach feeding and, sleeping and all of that stuff. So we want to celebrate that. We want people to make parenting choices that are in line with their cultural values, or in line with their beliefs, or in line with what they feel good about, and, to show up as the parents they want to be. So when we talk about flexibility, that's what we mean. We mean sort of freedom to make your choices about parenting. Here's a little example of how you can think about this. To try and simplify it down. Something might occur. You probably relate this. You see a photo, or a friend sends you a photo, or you see it online. Someone's bailing, my baby's eating broccoli. Great. That's already triggering things in me, because I might be like, oh my God, my kid hasn't eaten a vegetable for 2 days. So you see that can trigger a self-critical thought almost immediately. Oh God, I'm not doing it right. Everyone's doing that. Everyone's letting them eat with their hands. I've been giving them purees with a spoon. Am I doing it wrong? What if, because I haven't let them, I read a post that, you've got to let them experience the texture of the vegetables and the taste. What if that means they never eat a vegetable, and this impacts that, I can start catastrophizing, predicting the future, magnifying this little event from this one photo that I've quickly scrolled past. I could assume that, oh my God, when I was in the cafe feeding my baby, all my friends were like, what is she doing? She's got a spoon. That from very quickly, I don't know if you guys can identify with this, so it could just be my own anxiety, but that could really quickly lead to feeling sort of shame, sadness, frustration, anxiety, feeling inadequate. And that can all happen in just a fraction of a second. And all we've done is scroll past this, cute photo of a kid eating. So if I get tangled up in all this stuff here at the bottom, that might control what I choose to do next, right? If I'm hooked up on all that stuff, I might end up doing something that actually takes me away from the things that matter to me, right? What if I go away and I just start going inside myself? You could notice me, I'm just thinking about all of that and mulling over all those thoughts. It's called ruminating, right? We're looking over stuff from the past and kind of feeling sad, I'm not good enough. And, maybe that's taking me away, because what I actually value is being a present, connected parent. And in that moment, I wasn't really with my baby. I was kind of staring at my phone or just kind of ruminating. Maybe I carry on scrolling, because that's what we do. It's compelling. The algorithm fuels that, right? Or maybe I'm looking for more information that sort of says, actually, it's okay to use a spoon, or, you know what I mean? I'll just keep on doom scrolling. Like I said, then I'm not present. Maybe that sticks in my mind all day. I start to feel resentment, because maybe I have even further thoughts like, why can't my partner be the one responsible? Why haven't they looked at like information about feeding, and why don't they share this responsibility with me? Or, or I might just, be feeling all that anxiety and sadness, and then I start being irritable when my partner asks me if I'm okay. Again, moving me away from the partner I want to be, from the family member I want to be, because I want to be calm, I want to be present, I want to be loving. It might lead to me more rigid behaviors, So, okay, fine. I go on Amazon, I buy the book. Guilty. I've done all this. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's a habit, we might fall into. I buy the book on baby-led weaning. I post that I'm doing baby-led weaning. I don't let anybody have a spoon near my kid. I get really rigid about it. Well, maybe I'm not, I can't really be sure that one approach, I am sure that one approach isn't necessarily better than the other. What I am sure of is usually if we're sticking to a rule rigidly, it can lead us into difficulties. I'm not saying it's wrong if anyone's done that, by the way. If it works for you, do it. But I'm highlighting that it can actually move me away from the person I want to be if I rigidly stick to things. And I know I've fallen into traps like that when I was parenting over sort of maybe sleep. I have to 100% stick to the sleep schedule. Some people do, and that's totally fine. But for me, it probably stressed me out a little bit, at times more than it needed to. If we can, as Lisa and I are suggesting, kind of breathe, maybe get a little bit of space, use a little technique, a quick technique to just kind of, I'm going down the rabbit hole again. I'm having all those thoughts again. We'll talk about that in a minute, how we could do that. I get a bit of a freedom, right? So I'm at this little orange circle, which we call the choice point. And maybe I'm going to be able to choose to do something else in that moment, something that aligns with my values. So maybe acceptance might be one of my values. I really care about being accepting of myself and others. I accept when people make mistakes. I accept there are diverse ways of doing things. So I'm gentle with myself. I'm okay. Okay, sometime maybe I'll give her some finger food to try later, but I'm also okay with my purees, right? Maybe playfulness is one of my values. So do you know what? I'm just going to focus on my meal times being fun, because I want food to be something that my family and I enjoy. That's something I remember from my childhood is, enjoying meals together. And that's something I want my family to experience. So maybe I'll make a slightly different choice about what I do in that moment. To do that, I'll need some skills, which we'll go through lately. They might sound a bit strange now, but we've got some unhooking skills, which we'll demonstrate and invite you to just silently practice in your head. Mindfulness, Lisa is the expert here. She will go through this, but just to let you know, when we say mindfulness, what we're talking about is getting present, like really being there in the moment. Because a lot of times we're not actually there. We're off in our heads, we're off in our phones. Yeah, and then if I'm able to do that, I can be flexible, like I just mentioned. I can have my preferred approach, but maybe I don't need to get so distressed when things aren't going exactly right. And I can be a bit more responsive, my baby seems to favor this, so maybe I'll do a bit more of that. Or, really just have more choice. Whereas if we're really hooked on this stuff, our choices are kind of getting smaller and stuff's getting a bit more difficult. There's so many words on that slide. I hope makes some sense so you can relate to some of that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And, I can think of so many examples where we're left with those kinds of choices and action points, right? So as Joey was saying, when we're faced with, these types of difficulties and we notice that our mind is getting really hooked by particular narratives that are, exacerbating uncomfortable feelings for us and taking us away from our values, more importantly. What we can do to slow down the process and, encourage a pause, which allows our brain to be able to, access the more higher executive functions of making decisions, aligning with our values, regulating our emotions, right? So one of the first things we can do to take a pause is just a little grounding practice. We won't spend too long on it, but I'd love to just play it out here and now. So if you're able to, wherever you are, put down the laptop, put down the phone, get comfortable, and you're welcome to close your eyes or just adopt a downward and softened gaze. So we're first just going to take note of what's going on for you as you sit here, right now. Perhaps the mind is taking you off in all sorts of directions, thinking about what needs to be done. Wherever you are noticing that mind is taking you, just being curious and observant of that. And whilst that mind is doing its own thing, turn your attention to your feet and any planes of contact between your body and the surface upon which you rest. And just really noticing that and giving those feet a gentle squeeze into the ground. And just paying attention to the sensations. And perhaps just tapping those toes on the ground. And it's absolutely fine if that mind has been very noisy and pulling you off that anchor point. That's okay. Just notice when that happens and turn that awareness back to your body as it is right here, right now. And perhaps just allowing those arms to stretch out in front of you, to the side, above your head, just stretching those arms out. And now bringing those fingertips together. Again, just noticing the sensations of contact between your hands. And just giving those fingertips a gentle squeeze. Again, just tuning into that felt sensation. And no matter how many times your mind takes you off, just keep bringing the focus back. Well, lastly, just again turn the focus to your feet and giving them another push into the ground. And then I'll invite you just to very gently and slowly open those eyes and just gaze around the room, the space you find yourself in. And just mentally noting a couple of things you can see, anything you can hear. And then just coming back to the slideshow. So thanks for bearing with that experiment. And that's just a little idea of some of the ways you can try grounding yourself when you notice you've been swept away with all kinds of thoughts, just like we illuminated in that previous slide. that often this is the first point of call when we're wanting to pivot and potentially make different decisions more aligned with our value, that we first need to interject a bit of a pause, ground ourselves in the moment, remembering that we may not always have the luxury of doing a couple of minutes of a grounding practice, but just a quick squeeze of your feet into the ground, or those hands together, or a scan of the room can in itself be as effective. Right. So again, it's, I think, one of the most important things with parenthood is also being able to modify and curate it to fit you and your need in that moment. Right. So Joey's going to take us through this next technique around unhooking from our difficult thoughts.
So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour.
Yes.
Of another idea for how you might deal with getting stuck in all this difficult stuff. This is something you can Google later, ask your therapist about, or this is the sort of thing that we help people with. But when we say unhooking from difficult thoughts, one way is, as Lisa mentioned, just really reconnect with your body and your surroundings. Take a pause. That can be really effective. If you're the kind of person, well, you're human, so you find that thoughts get really sticky, or you're having really difficult thoughts that keep recurring, just to give an example, right now, even as I do this talk, my brain, because I have a mum brain, even before kids, it would generate, God, this talk is awful. If I was looking at your guys' faces, this is why I hide all the view of everyone anyway, when I do talks, I'd be thinking, oh, they look so bored. Or I might be having a mum guilt thought, like I should really be with my daughter right now, which is something working mums might experience. Actually, any mum might experience. My brain all of our brains are powerful storytellers, especially after we have kids. They're always, as I mentioned, they're always generating. Your mind is always generating content to kind of force you to keep baby safe and focus on mumming, parenting, dadding. But for me, that triggers a narrative that I walk around with, the kind of I'm a terrible mum. The terrible mum story could consist of a million different thoughts, like, you should be doing this, you're not doing that well enough, you're not cut out for this, you should be with your kid right now. Oh God, you're not doing very well at this, are you? And much more expletive thoughts. But I could give those a headline. The terrible mum. Oh, there's the terrible mum story again. I can even, it might sound strange, just kind of gently say that to myself. I invite all of you to do that too. Or even just to say, oh, there my mind goes again. There it goes again with all those difficult thoughts. There it goes again with the shoulding. That can be enough if you just try that out even silently in your head, just to get you a bit of distance. So just another example of how you might do this. You might name the story like, oh, there's the terrible mum story. I invite you all to just try to think of, it might be very easy to think of, what is your narrative that your brain likes to tell you about your parenting? Or what is your most common difficult thought? Or what is your thing that your brain knows it can hook you on? I'm sure you all know what your sort of Achilles heel of parenting is that your mind loves to beat you up about. So say if mine is, I'm a terrible mum. I'm really stuck on that thought. Oh my God, I'm such a terrible mum. Then I might say to myself, I'm having the thought that I am a terrible mum. So I invite you guys to just say silently to yourself in your heads, I'm having the thought that, insert your difficult thought, and just see if that feels any different. To take it further, you could say, I know it's a mouthful, go with me here, I know this sounds a bit odd. I noticed that I am having the thought that I am a terrible mum. Just saying that to yourself, insert your own thought. Mine is, I'm a expletive word, mum. Just to kind of say those words to yourself, just see if you notice any difference. God, I'm such a terrible mum. I notice that I'm having the thought that I am a terrible mum. The goal here is to try and get a bit of space from the difficult thoughts. It won't make it go away, it won't prove it wrong, but it might give us enough space that we could go back to that orange choice point we were talking about earlier. If I get enough space from that thought, then maybe I can refocus, be more present, and choose what I do next based on my values.
Thank you, Joe. Such a helpful technique. I must say I use that one a huge amount of the time with my own very critical storytellers. So another important and helpful hack, I think, in, cutting through some of the noise is also, mindfulness. And I know this is a very kind of trendy concept at the moment and also often feels very out of reach, right? Or lacking feasibility, especially as a new parent. And I think what's really important to remember about mindfulness is that the informal practice of mindfulness can be accessed anytime, anywhere, simply by just coming into the present moment, using your body, using your senses of perception to just take a note of where you are in space and time, right? And I think, that there is a huge amount to mention in this case, but I think, as we're just being mindful of the time, just, perhaps an important note to play around with, that you can, in any activity, tap into the here and now with yourself, with your baby, with your family too. And we've got a couple of resources that are quite nice in teaching some of the kind of basics around mindfulness that might help one to just kind of strengthen that capacity to be able to touch into it informally as you go about your daily lives. So the next concept we're going to talk about very quickly are one's values, right? And what does this, mean for us? And really, these are just kind of helpful ways of creating direction in our life. They're not the destination in any way, right? But, I think values are really desired qualities of behaviors, right? How we want to behave on an ongoing basis, the type of person we're wanting to be, what kind of life we want to live, really those principles that guide us. And we find that these are often very intrinsically rewarding as they are linked to greater sense of meaning and purpose. And I think lastly, just to say that values are dynamic, right? We change and what we value can change too. They also might have different priorities at different times in our lives. So a lot of different domains for our values. This is not an exhaustive list, but rather I think some important questions, about what I care for, what I stand for, what's important to me, especially under this umbrella of parenthood that we're discussing today, that might be some, helpful ways of clarifying what are these values of mine and how can I go about setting some goals and actions to help me achieve more alignment with those domains. So this is just a reflection exercise and perhaps something to, even take a picture of. We may not have time for it now, but to spend a bit of time later reflecting upon. It can be another way of eliciting some of what your values are, right? So imagining your kids are grown up and are being interviewed about their experience of being parented by you. How would you want to be remembered as a parent? And below are just some, not all, of the kind of values that one may be considering in this reflective process. So if we go on to relationships, once more, this could be an entire presentation in and of itself, right? But we know that exposure to a lot of different information sources can also impact our relationships, right? The classic unwanted, unsolicited advice that can become problematic. So I'm aware of the time, and perhaps what we can do, if it's okay, is just leave you with the good enough parenting recipe. Really, when we talk about this good enough parent, I think, Winnicott, who was one of the pioneers around attachment, spoke to the fact that being the perfect parent is actually not the best for ourselves and also for our babies, right? That, of course, we need to recognize and respond to their needs, but as they grow and develop, we may need to adapt how we are responding to these needs and actually allow time for them to experience a little bit of frustration or not having every need met in exactly the way that they want to. So, of course, being responsive is hugely important, paying attention to and recognizing their needs, their emotions, providing physical, emotional safety. But I think really importantly also attending to one's own emotional states and needs, filling one's own cup before we're giving out, and then implementing some of those parenting practices aligned with one's values and considering the sources of advice before adopting it. And in the next couple of slides, we've got some recommendations for some kind of evidence-based sources if you would like to check them out. Now, of course, it's okay to look at parenting content, but we want to curate and filter that information. Follow certified evidence-based sources if possible. And of course, also using your real life network, right? So these are also some really nice resources for busting the myth podcast, Supermom podcast, and also the Supermom myth, which is written by two psychologists, has some really nice practical tips for overcoming some of the difficulties we've talked to today.
Firstly, thank you so much. I was very, very much nodding in the background, nodding my head the whole way through. I think one of the things I really, really valued you covering was kind of the not labeling, the there is no one way. In fact, there isn't a way. There doesn't need to be, you don't need to be a baby-led weaning mum or a spoon-fed mum. Can actually do both. You can do neither. You can do a mix. You can do one, you can do the other. It doesn't require a label. The same with, breastfeeding, bottle feeding, breast milk, formula milk. You don't have to put a label on yourself and the methods that you're choosing to do. You're just doing it. You're just keeping a little human alive, end of. I mean, that's the job. The job isn't to be a baby-led weaning mum. The job is to keep your baby alive and to thrive yourself and to give them an example of what physically, emotionally healthy, adult looks like for them to grow into themselves. I absolutely loved as well when you said to think about, what's important to me. What do I care about? I remember when my little one was young, there one very, very simple thing that was important to both myself and my husband really led us in quite a strong way down certain paths in terms of decisions, but it was very much built around what was important to us. And that was eating around a table together. We both really value food. We're both foodies. We love eating. We love going out to restaurants. We'd always made an effort to sit together and have dinner together. And we wanted that to happen with our little one. And we wanted to be able to take her out to restaurants and just to experience, that side of life. So that really did help me shape many of the ways that I decided to parent, or we decided to parent, because I kind of had a goal in mind that wasn't linked to what type of mum I wanted to be. It was just very much linked to, this is really important to us. We want dinners to be enjoyable and varied. And it was just a lovely way to kind of navigate my way through quite a few different experiences that would otherwise have labels put on them,
What a wonderful example, Kathy. Thank you for sharing, that kind of infusion of values and how that helped align some of your choices and actions.
Yeah, I mean, you don't realize sometimes until you sit on a talk like this and you get the chance to reflect back and gave me the opportunity to look back and think, I can actually remember making some decisions based on that versus the label baby led or whatever. It was interesting. We have someone here that said, just reflecting. I think ironically, the expertization of parenting with the introduction of lactation consultants, sleep trainers, nutritionists, behavioral therapists, etc., though intended to help, also creates stress in a way. How can we better learn to filter, navigate our way through all of the plethora of options and opinions? Yes.
Great question. I think a lot of us
that should have been on a slide at the start, I feel.
Absolutely. Look, I think, a very challenging part of the experience of parenthood, and of course, a privilege to be able to have access to, experts and supports, etc. But I think something to always hold in mind is, despite their expertise in a particular domain, you are always the expert of yourself and your baby, right? And I think being able to trust in that and again, curate and create a filter as to, what's helpful, what fits for you, and letting go of what doesn't, right? So again, perhaps, using the grounding, using the values clarification to just firstly slow down that process before you act upon it. And then to make sure, that you're able to take on board what fits for you and let go of that which doesn't. Joey, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts to add to that.
Oh, so many. It really takes me back. You're right. Especially, I don't know if I assume the person who asked the question's in Singapore. I found that it's lovely because there are a lot of experts available that I could get an appointment with really quickly, and lovely people that would WhatsApp me, and that is great. But yes, I completely agree. It can be overwhelming. I would say, similar to what Lisa said, we do have this gut-like intuition inside. Like I personally remember getting about 3 or 4 different inputs about feeding during pregnancy and in the hospital and beyond. And I remember one of the pieces of advice I just followed because they're an expert. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I just followed it. And I'm a rule follower. I just followed it to the T, what this person said. I later asked someone else, and I actually dropped what they'd told me to do because there was things about it that didn't feel right to me and didn't make sense to me. And when I spoke to someone else later, they were like, well, did that advice sound right to you? And I was like, no, it didn't sound right to me. And she was like, right, so trust that. There's something so personal as feeding. I mean, obviously, I had advice that really helped. My personal strategy is to pick a friend who you align with on values, someone you look at who's maybe already had kids and you really like the way they parent. You like, you see yourself in them. And I would usually, and then we had a sort of similar experience. So I'd usually ask that person. I found a doula who this is the same for all experts, by the way, pediatricians, gynaes, doulas, therapists. You kind of need to find one that you feel comfortable with, you click with. And then I just sort of chose to trust that person. But I also try to be flexible, take on the advice, do your research, be flexible with it. Don't take on anything as a rule. Someone saying to me, don't feed the baby longer than 7 minutes. That's a very rigid rule. And rarely, as I said in the talk, rarely are rules helpful if we just rigidly apply them. So yeah, I would say look out for rigid advice, black and white advice. Look for the people that you resonate with, professionals and in your network. Yeah, and trust your gut. Because like we say, there's not really much you can do terribly wrong. There's so many ways to do this.
I completely agree with that. I love that you said that. There's not very much at all that we can really do wrong. It's not an easy fundamental of life, but it is a fundamental of life. And, the end goal is to keep them alive. And like you say, good enough is exactly what you need. It doesn't need to be more. It doesn't, it shouldn't be less, but good enough is what is all we need to aim for. And I don't know when did all this start? I mean, maybe the person that reflected on all of these specialists, maybe that was the point. I don't know, when it stopped being the home-based village, when it stopped being the mums, the grandmas, the neighbors, the cousins. And from the way that we live now, we have to replicate that with professionals. And maybe that was the start of kind of all of these feelings. I don't know. I'm finishing off with feeling very reflective at the end of all this, looking back on how I felt at the time, which was very, very confused 7 years ago. But I'm just pleased now that I can introduce people like you, because I think even 7 years ago, it wasn't easy for me to find people like you. I was in Bangkok. I wasn't in Singapore at the time. But, having said that, I think it's so important that we bring this content, these ideas, this idea to just cut through, like you say, de-influencing, to just cut through and empower the people that are listening to this with their gut instinct. It's just so powerful. I think on that note, I am going to say my hugest of thank yous. I didn't touch on this right at the start, but I know that you guys are on different time zones. So we are very, very lucky to have you here and appreciate you getting up right and very early.
We're all up anyway.
Exactly. It feels like we're halfway through the day already.
Late in the day.
Very, very true. So a huge thank you for coming on and explaining these different concepts to us, giving us those tools that we can use moving forward. And hopefully the people listening to this can use those tools themselves, reflect a little bit, but also pass this on, create that village outside of the professionals. Speak to the neighbor next to you, speak to your sister, your friend, whether they're at home, whether they're, here. Speak to them and tell them some of these tools, explain to them the resources that are out there and the different ways that you can look at this, I think is really, really powerful. And of course, you can always get in contact with these wonderful ladies. These ladies do online consults, very much part of the Alliance Counselling network. Alliance Counselling also is based in Singapore as well. So if you want to see someone face to face, there's people here and they have wonderful spaces, very calming, wonderful spaces to go. And we're here for you all whenever you need us. So for me, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Wonderful, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.